Good afternoon. My name is Richard Hecht. I'm Emeritus Professor in Religious Studies, and I'm also the Program Director for the Herman P. and Sophia Taubman Endowed Jewish Studies Symposia. And this afternoon, we have really one of the most distinguished speakers that we've had this year. And I must say that I've been waiting for this afternoon since I first communicated with our speaker in the summer. So I'm absolutely thrilled, Marjorie, to be able to introduce you. Marjorie Agosin is the Andrew Mellon Professor in the Humanities at Wellesley College. She has published, by my count, and I hope that if this is inaccurate, you'll pardon me. By my count, she's published 30 books, and they have been in a variety of genres, from poetry to prose to memoirs to theater monologues. In the array of her publications, she tries to create a language that is both lyrical and haunting, and where memories and the labor of remembrance intersect in a crossroad. She has also written extensively about the cultural production of Jews of Latin America around the themes of migration, identity, and ethnicity that she believes has remained largely hidden to so many, and thus her work to uncover their presence and their truth is a form of writing. Among her many books are Dear Anne Frank, poems from 1998, Invisible Dreamer, Memory, Judaism, and Human Rights in 2015, Home, An Imagined Landscape in 2016, Miriam's Daughters, Jewish Latin American Women Poets in 2001, Stitching Resistance, Women, Creativity, and the Fiber Arts in 2014, and then most recently, A Cross and a Star, Memoirs of a Jewish Girl in Chile in 2022. She has also written 2 young adult novels. The first, I Lived in Butterfly Hill, and the second, The Maps of Memory. And she is now in the process of writing a third, which is titled, I believe, Lies. Her most recent work is about Aldo Izzo, the caretaker of the old Jewish cemetery of Venice at Lido, and a prose poem collection, Notes from the Sea, that is translated by our colleague, Jill Levine, in the Spanish and Portuguese department, who I think is here today also listening to your presentation. So please join me in welcoming Marjorie Agosin, who will speak today on A Cross and a Star, Reflections on Memoir Writing and Jewish Life in Chile.
Thank you. Thank you, Richard. Thank you for your beautiful introduction. I have one correction. It's not lies, it's Liesel, but I think I probably didn't spell it correctly. Before I begin, I'd like to thank everybody who is in the audience. I'm so sorry I do not see your faces, but I appreciate very much you're there. And I want to thank Jill and Ruth Behar for writing a beautiful afterword to A Cross and a Star. And I also want to thank Celeste Kostopoulos Cooperman for translating this memoir. I'd like to begin by saying that this book was written exactly, and it was published 30 years ago by the University of New Mexico Press in a hardback edition, and now it's being reissued with a new prologue and an afterword, again by the University of New Mexico Press. So I'm also very grateful to the press and to believe in my work. It's hard to speak to a camera like this, but we will make it as intimate as possible. And I will share with you the details on the making and the process of writing A Cross and a Star. And then I will look forward to all of your questions. But I'd like to begin by saying that when all is a void, when all seems so banal, so futile, so ebbing in this way, big threats or waves of disappearances, especially the scenes of the war that we see every day, I ask myself, and I think all of us ask ourselves, what will remain? And what remains is words, and what remains is literature. Someday, someone, or already has happened, will tell these stories, will tell them through poems, through drawings, through memoirs. But the only thing that will preserve trauma and beauty and horror and joy will be literature. So I'd like to begin by saying that for many writers and for the communities of people, literature is the path to understand our world and to understand history. Before we had written language, we had songs, and we had memories. And the great goddesses of ancient Greece, the muses, a lot of them Urania's daughters, were the ones that told stories about mortals, told stories about the gods. Odysseus told stories about his journeys. So the idea of humanity being intertwined with a tale is what moves the world. I have been very interested in the whole process of memorialization. How do you memorialize communities? How do you speak about entire families that disappeared? And how do you touch upon the individual memory and the collective memory? But I grew up in Santiago, Chile, in a very vibrant household where many languages were spoken, where meals were celebrated. But I grew up in a home with many pauses, many things unsaid, and many things that were sealed in almost in a perpetual silence. I believe that what was unsealed both, because sometimes it was sealed and then unsealed, was what really mattered. And I had to find a way to speak about these pauses, these silences, and the way in which people share their past or didn't share it. So I began thinking a lot about the life of my parents, my own life as an exile from Chile to the United States, my own love and affirmation of the Spanish language, always trying to preserve this past. And then somehow I believe that life kind of happens. You cannot force it, it takes over. And almost 30 years ago, when I was expecting my daughter Sonia, my mother all of a sudden said to me, you should write the story about my past. And then I said, well, who is going to be interested in our past? We were nomadic, we were always fleeing, we were marginal at the edge of society, always from somewhere else, like my father used to say. And then my mother insisted. And then she said, well, let me just tell you this story. When I was 7 years old and I wanted to go to school, I was not accepted in the German school because I was Jewish. I was not accepted in the Catholic school because I didn't have my certificate of baptism. And I was only accepted in a very remote and very poor indigenous school. And then she said, and when I went by the German school, there was the Nazi flag. I thought a lot about it. And I do think that mothers have a sixth sense, an intuitive sense. And I listened to my mother, and I began exploring and thinking, how am I going to write a cross and a star? Like Ruth Behar said in the prologue, my mother gave me a great gift because she immediately made me the cartographer of her memories and the historian of the family's past. And also I'm sure she wanted me to transmit this story to my children and to other young people of the family, to follow almost a Jewish command from generation to generation, you should remember. Writing A Cross and a Star was very haunting, was very perplexing. I always wrote poetry. I've never had the experience of writing a memoir. But what I knew that I didn't want to write a memoir that had a chronology. I am not interested in what begins, what is in the middle, and what is in the end. I am interested in a totality of feeling, of a totality of emotion. So I began thinking, what is memory? And how do you write about memory? And how do you stitch a memory? And how you compose it? But first, I knew that my mother had given me the possibility to be the bridge to her past. And I wanted to really honor that past. So I began, and the book begins by saying that I will, everything I narrate, I share is the truth. And I write it because I even wanted to be more truthful. So I'm thinking that I wanted to bring this idea that writing is an affirmation. Writing is born out of the necessity to tell and to speak about justice. And this is why I said I want to write the truth. I chose the vignette form because I think that these little, they're like little stars that wander in the page, these little snippets of time or of memory fit within the real theme. So there is a plot, but there is not a plot. And I would like to believe that each reader will find where to go, where to start, and where to begin. And I also wanted to capture my mother's emotions, my mother's sense of beauty and of trauma and of horror, living in the midst of the Holocaust in a town in the south of Chile that had almost a whole community of German people to be Nazis and to be Nazi sympathizers. When you begin to read this book and you begin to wonder who is speaking, well, there's also a magic about who is speaking, because sometimes I speak as the author and I speak as the daughter, and sometimes my mother speaks as my mother. So they're mediated voices amidst this almost garden, a lush garden of stories, of memories, of ideas. But there is an evident plot which tells the story of a young girl growing up in a community that expels her family, that doesn't allow her father to enter the German club only after hours. She lives in a community where people go to vote for Hitler in the international waters. And she learns about acceptance, among the poor, among the indigenous. And she also learns about love, about the beautiful place, about the rain, about the volcanoes, about the way people speak in the south of Chile. So it's a book that speaks really about paying attention. And I think that this is what Memoirs is about. You pay attention, you listen, you emphasize what you wish to remember or what my mother didn't want me to remember. The process was very interesting because we used to speak to one another. I took notes. She sent me tapes in a little cassette player that they don't make anymore with very, very tiny tapes. She sent me letters. What I love the most, and I still have, are the letters with her very elegant penmanship and where she really wanted me to capture her time. But at the end, I didn't look at anything because I think the process of writing notes is that you will not look at them later, but that you will remember the essence of things. And I always grew up very close to my father, who said to me, just don't write anything, just remember it. So for me, the idea that I have to constantly remember and pay attention has been instilled in me since I was very, very young. I believe literature is a bit of a trance. It has magic. You cannot be a writer without believing in magic. It's bewitching. And I just began writing these snippets, putting the book down, then picking it up, writing until my mother got married in 1948. Her wedding dress burned. The second floor of her house burned the same day of the wedding. And somehow they went on, they were resilient, they survived. But the book really folded itself almost like a magical thread. It happened. It didn't resist. I think that when you are writing, you have to let the story take over. And I think I let my mother's life and my mother's story just become. Within this whole, and I also wanted to share with you that I believe that the best way, the best language to use when you speak about a very intimate and a very personal memoir is the language of poetry that captures the essence and that is a mirror for our humanity. At the same time, I felt that I wanted to tell a bigger story. I wanted to tell not only a tale, but a history of Jewish immigration in Latin America, Jewish immigration particularly to Chile, and how little we knew as citizens of Chile in modern times, in the 70s, the 80s, and how strong was Chile's Nazis past. I believe that Chile collaborated with the Nazis. There were many Nazi officers stationed in Valparaiso and making sure that Nazis submarines would be free to arrive to the Pacific coast. And anti-Semitism was prevalent in places that were very, very few Jews. And this is really what's happening in the world. You don't need to have one single Jew to have anti-Semitism. But I wanted, as a writer, to discover what is hidden, not only what is hidden in my mother's heart, but what is hidden at large in a nation, the deception of a nation, the lies of a nation. And when I tried to research through newspapers, what happened in Chile between 1938 to 1942, I always was met with, we don't have these documents, they were misplaced. I went to a place called the German League, and all the German newspapers of the time were gone. So I wanted to not to expose the truth through literature, but to really tell the truth through the real lives of people that suffered tremendously in these communities of the South that were really ruled by the Nazis. There's another important story to tell, a modern story. There's now has been dismantled, but there was a Nazi colony called Colonia Dignidad. You can see a documentary in Netflix where this man, Schaefer, was really a Nazi that supported Pinochet and brought prisoners to this place. So this is contemporary, but I wanted to talk about the past. I believe then that I wanted to restore my mother's past, to honor it. And I wanted to really speak about memory as a way of arriving to the truth. But also through this book, I wanted to express the idea that memory is not passive, but memory is in the now. And to quote Hannah Arendt, to believe that there is a future in knowing the past. These were the things that I tried to accomplish. I also wanted to create and recreate the beauty of the Chilean landscape, and also what it was like to grow up always as a foreign minority. In the book, I begin to speak about many characters that will appear throughout my work. I feel that they're with me now. And like a friend of mine said, medical science tells you that when you're dead, you're dead. But the knowledge of poetry says that you are not dead, that you live in memory, you live in remembrance, and you live in the stories of others. So in A Cross and a Star, there's a character, my great-grandmother, who leaves the port of Hamburg in 1938 and travels to Chile and arrives to the coast of Valparaiso in 1939. And my mother always told me this beautiful story that she had never seen the sea. And that always stayed with me because Chile is a country that is almost a sea in itself, but she grew up in Santiago and then she grew up in the South. And for me, it was so pleasurable to recreate this idea that she went on a bus with her father and the brother to look at her, to find her, and to even hire a little boat so they would get close to the big ship. And this is history, but this is love and it's human emotion. And I wanted to be a lighthouse to all of these emotions. And I think I wanted to let my parents know, my family, readers, that you can find safety in literature, and that literature could be your harbor. What is very interesting about the arrival of my great-grandmother is that she arrived in the last boat that sailed from Hamburg to Chile. Hardly anyone knows about this boat. The boat is called El Copiapó. The captain was 31 years old. When the Gestapo arrived to the ship, they asked if there were Jews there. There were 90 Jewish families. My great-grandmother was her son. And the captain says, no, there are no Jews. They're just people that are returning home back from long vacations in Europe. So these stories, I didn't get to speak about the ship when I wrote the book because I didn't know enough about it. But I'm just telling you that within all this savagery, all this barbarism, and all this fractured world, there is something that is whole, which is love, which is humanity, which is the desire not to be an accomplice. Writing again this book opened up doors to these different characters of my family. Especially, I wrote a collection of poems about my great-grandmother living in Vienna and me later on meeting her in Vienna. Of course, metaphorically meeting her. But after I finished my mother's book and I was met with a lot of positive commentaries, but a lot of negative commentaries from the Chilean community. Chilean communities living in exile who were Germans, and they didn't want to read what I had to say. And also, there were Chilean Jews that didn't believe me that the Nazi flag was there in the German school. I gave many lectures about these books, but there comes a point where you stop justifying yourself and eventually truth will reveal itself. So a Canadian historian did a whole narrative, historiography about the Nazi schools in South America, and one of them was a school in Osorno that was airing, or I don't know how to say it in English, flameando. They had the Nazi flag with great ease. Going back to how this book opened up so many paths, one day my father told me, well, why don't you write about my story? And my father was so shy and so unpretentious. And I said, he wouldn't want other people to read about him. He would be mortified if somebody knew about his life. But I think his life, my father thought it was very important that others would know his struggles. His struggles as a young boy, as a young medical student in the middle of World War II. His struggles when he became the only Jewish full professors, and the terrible phone calls at nighttime from the Opus Dei saying that a Jew should not occupy that position. This is also the story of great migration from Odessa, Sevastopol, Istanbul, Marseille, Valparaiso. And I wrote my father's memoir, but here I am more the daughter that listens to her father. When I wrote about my mother, there was another sense of intimacy, because I believe the very intimate relationship that exists with a mother and with her daughter. I like to say that, and Ruth mentions this in the book, and then with Celeste, she could speak about it when she's translated it. My mother and myself, we are hopeful. We have no animosity for others, no vengeance, and we don't carry these horrible grudges that will not allow you to walk freely. So I must say that even though there was so much trauma that I had to recover, I felt that the experience of writing this book was joyful, was hopeful, that I still believed in a humanity that I focus on the kindness of the young girls that took my mother in when she went to school, that they found her so beautiful, and they didn't know what being a Jew meant, but they were welcoming. And these are the things that I would like to remember, to preserve, to recount. I also think, to maybe finalize this, and I don't know how long I've been talking, but these stories must be told. Without memory, the world, again, just like I began sharing with you, becomes a void. And without the spirit of imagination and possibilities and the freedom to imagine, you have no stories, you have no memories, and you have no literature. So this has been my own experiences writing about my parents, and I wrote about my great-grandmother. And I hope that Chile eventually will recognize its involvement with the Nazis, will recognize how they've treated some foreign minorities. Eventually, they will have to come to terms with this past in order to continue to grow and to continue to become a more noble nation. And that goes for all nations of the world. So I think I went from telling the stories of two ordinary people in extraordinary times to telling the stories of a community, to telling the stories of a nation, and really to telling the story of the world in one of the most dramatic times of human history. I remain a poet, will always be a poet. These two books honor poetry, honor sorrow, honor joy. And I have invited the reader to be part of my imagination, to read a memoir, excuse me, that doesn't have to have a chronology, because the chronology is life itself. And the chronology you find in the book is a larger history, larger than Frida, larger than Moises, larger than me. It belongs to others. And I think that readers are very essential in the restoration and the preservation of memory. I think that, I don't know how long I've spoken, but I'll be more than happy to answer questions, thoughts, and thank you for listening to me.
Marjorie, thank you very much. And I invite people to use the question and answer function on their computers to address questions to us. And while they're doing that, I found this such a rich presentation. And I have really two questions that I'd like to raise with you. So the first of these questions is these two voices about writing the memoir of your father versus the voice of the memoir of your mother, the intimate voice versus the daughter who is listening to her father. I wonder if you could tell us more about those two voices and perhaps give us some examples of those two voices.
Thank you. And thank you, Richard. And really, the listening was very different, not because I was the daughter and the father was authoritarian and the mother was a female and not authoritarian, not at all. But this is, I can explain to you very, very clearly this. My father's story in the book, I don't think anybody can see it, but I don't know if you can see it, I'll show you here. It's called Always from Somewhere Else, and it spans the middle of the 19th century, the beginning of the 20th, half of the 20th century, the beginning of 21st. It's very expansive. And the narrative, it's really abundant in historical facts. It speaks about their migration from when they walked from Odessa to Turkey. It speaks about Russian Jews living in Turkey, learning Turkish, learning Arabic, becoming a tailor, living in a Muslim society, in a Christian society, sailing all the way from Marseille to Valparaiso, returning to Valparaiso so the family could leave for Chile. So it's very rich in history. And that's why I listened, and I didn't want to miss anything. And I wanted to understand what it was like for my father to grow up, to go to medical school during the war. I wanted to tell the story of a priest that used to stand by his pension, boarding house, every day and cursing the Jews. I wanted people to know what he went through. I wanted to talk about his love of music, about his beloved piano in exile in Georgia. My mother's book is very brief in terms of historical time. It's almost like 1938 to 1948, 10 years, from the time she was in Osorno till the time she married. And I also wanted to capture her voice in terms of the everyday, in terms of going to buy bread at Señora Blanquita. My father's everyday was tumultuous. It was a struggle to walk. They were going to beat him up. So there were two different stories of two different people. But let me read you one, let's see. Okay, let me try. What's this slide? Let's see. So this is my mother's voice. Let's see. Okay, I found the right page to read you. My mother, Frida. My mother's name is Frida, which in German means peace. She's a petite and quiet woman. When she speaks, I need only to look at her ashen-colored eyes, the color of seaport waters, to be happy and feel those secret melodies of her inner peace. My mother is neither loquacious nor effusive. Rather, she maintains a secret reserve as she approaches the gestures of love, song, and storytelling from many years' experience. Sometimes she takes me by the hand, and I know that the moment of sacred memory has arrived. Then I listen to her and don't make any demands. I also don't ask her for details. I simply let her tell me things, like when the German girls in southern Chile snatched her dolls and made fun of her, or when they stoned her at the exit of the public school. One day she wanted to tell me her story, not because of a narcissistic anxiety to achieve immortality, but because it seemed beautiful to her to imagine a young girl of Viennese and Russian parents living in the southernmost extreme of the world, learning the language of Araucanian plants and praying in the afternoons in a hidden Hebrew tongue. For a long time, I heard my mother tell me about the exploits of a childhood immersed in the sadness of foreignness, and I gathered together her words. I didn't invent anything, or perhaps I invented everything. Sometimes her voice rolls up like my own in order to confuse itself with the language of love. And I couldn't have picked up a better paragraph. And I picked it up at random to answer your question, Richard. I could read you something about my father, but I don't know how we're doing with time.
We have plenty of time. We do have other people who have presented questions, but I find this so powerful. The way you're speaking about memory and memoir and the voices of your mother and father, and then their experiences that are seen in the voices that you've created. So if you want to read something from We're Always from Somewhere Else.
Yeah. Let me, shall I take one or two questions and then we go back to
Sure. So let me go to
or if Celeste would like to comment, if Ruth is in there. I think Ruth may not be here.
Let me we have two questions from Brendan Sanders, and the first of them is, can you share a little bit about the experience of Jews in Chile? That's the first question.
Well, it's a broad question, an important question. I would like to say that Chile is no different than most Latin American countries, where we are less than 1% of the population. And when people say that countries like Mexico accept thousands and thousands of Jewish refugees, it's absolutely not true. They accepted less than Chile. And Mexico is a huge country. And they accepted people that left during the Spanish Civil War, which is absolutely fine, but the truth is very deceiving. I grew up in a secular home. I grew another important part of the Cross and Star. I grew up with indigenous maids. I understood a little bit of their language. I learned a lot from the art of storytelling through them. They knew nothing about Jews. One of them baptized my sister and I so that we wouldn't go to hell. But my father was so smart that said a little bit of holy water will not hurt them. And we were done with the story. I love Chile very much. It's where I truly belong. I belong to the sea, to this sometimes very stupid sense of humor we have. I belong to its great poets. And at the same time, I don't belong at all because I'm a Jew. But the same thing I would say about this country. You know, Americans are not as exceptional as they think they are. And who would believe that this country would take anti-Semitism as a norm? It's happening now. And whoever spoke about quotas, even where I teach, they had quotas for Jewish students. So I think a Jew is a person that belongs elsewhere, that belongs perhaps to a book, belongs to a nomadic existence, belongs to a nation, and doesn't belong to a nation. And I think it's a universal experience. And even in Israel, you can emigrate to Israel and you can be a Jew and not feel part of Israel. But you know, I am an optimist, and I think this is wonderful for a writer because I have a lot to think about and a lot to write about. And I don't want to belong to exactly a nation. I want to belong to the larger world, to the world of literature, to the world of beauty, to the stars, to the seas. I don't see myself rooted in a nation. Although Chile is very important to me, but I went to a Hebrew school. I'm very happy to be a fluent speaker of Hebrew. No matter where I go in the world, I find somebody that speaks Hebrew, and they always help me. I love my years in Chile. I love the school. I have a huge family of about 200 people, and I belong to that family. But do I belong to the Chilean aristocracy? No. Will they look at me and treat me as their own? No. Not that I want to belong to this aristocracy, but there's always a distance. There's always something that separates you. But I have accepted that separation. I belong to myself, to my books, and to the people I love, and that's my nation. But being a Jew in Chile right now is particularly hard too. Unfortunately, we had hoped for a leftist president that would bring new ideas to the country, but I think he's completely immature. He didn't accept the credentials of the Israeli ambassador, which he was quite foolish. He made a political scandal. And it's fine to support the Palestinian cause, absolutely. But he has brought the Palestinian conflict from the Middle East to Chile, and he has caused great animosity among the 15,000 Jews and the 450,000 Palestinians. So if I could meet Boric, which I hope I will meet one day, I will just tell him that he should learn more about history and learn more about the Nazi sympathizers of his own country. But right now, Chile is suffering because of this. But all periods of Jewish history have tremendous suffering. And Israel is suffering internally, but we are not strangers to suffering, and we are not strangers to resilience. So I hope I've answered your question.
We have a number of questions, really interesting questions, and I want to go among these questions first to Corey Weiss, who I must tell you I think was my student 30 years ago. So Corey writes to us, have either of your memoirs been developed for television or film?
That would be my dream. And my son is a filmmaker, but he always says, Mom, I'll do your books. But, sons don't listen. Daughters listen more than sons. So yeah, he hasn't listened to me, but no. And I think it would make a beautiful story within the context of Chilean society around this time. The young adult novel is in the hands of possible filmmakers. I lived in Butterfly Hill, but the Hollywood world, one day you own the sky and the other day everything falls apart. But maybe I don't know, I have a feeling that would happen, but I would like for A Cross and a Star to maybe be made into a film, especially to have a very lyrical filmmaker. And I don't know if my son Joseph is somewhere. Maybe he'll do it, maybe not. But thank you for asking.
So Professor Levine writes, this is Jill writing.
Yeah.
She writes to you, Dear Margie, what a moving and informative presentation. Thank you. When you said the girl stole her doll, I think, at the exit of the school. What did that mean? It made me think of a recent excellent film I saw directed by Manuela Martelli, which tells of the terrifying effect of the coup on middle-class everyday life, the film called Chile 76.
Thank you, Jill. And Jill and I know each other for a long time. We're having fun with Notes from the Sea. What it meant was that, see, my mom went to the indigenous school. She was blonde and had violet eyes. And the girls from the Catholic school, the German school, looked at her with great animosity, and they were often with her brother beat up on the way home from school. And they took my mother's doll, and they stole the doll, and they always beat up my uncle. And as the time went by, they became stronger and they fought. When they said enough, they defended themselves. And that's when they became even more courageous. But I like to see that film, Jill. I think it's very interesting. And the military junta was very brutal to young people, to the middle class, to the lower classes. They were, in a way, the tragedy is that they were also from the middle class, the lower classes, but to treat others with indignity gave them power, and that was their brutality. So I understand what you're talking about and about the film.
Ephraim Salonov writes as follows: "Thank you very much for your presentation and story. My parents and grandparents survived within the USSR, and my grandparents, identified as Holocaust survivors, was never and is still not an identity they occupied easily or comfortably. Can you speak to your parents' relationship with this term as victims of European anti-Semitism?"
Thank you for your question. And as I said at the beginning, my grandparents, not so much my parents, it was of course a younger generation, didn't identify themselves as Holocaust survivors. My grandfather escaped, left. They had a sense, a foreshadowing. My grandfather escaped, left in the 30s. His mother left in 38 with the brother. My great-grandfather is buried in the Jewish cemetery of Vienna. He died in 1933. They left before the Shoah. The rest of my family perished. But they didn't speak about even the term Holocaust. They never spoke it at home. They never spoke about European anti-Semitism. And my grandfather loved Austria and loved all his girlfriends that he had. He was very handsome when he was living there. And I didn't love Austria. I didn't love the German language, but thanks to a dear friend of mine, Roberta Meyerhofer, an Austrian, I recovered Austria. And I think I have reclaimed their country. I guess I am an Austrian too. So, but your question is very similar to your parents. They never spoke about it, never.
So I want to just read a response from Jill Levine, my colleague and your dear friend. She writes in response to your response to her question, "What a horror. I'm so happy to be working with you, Margie. You are a wonderful poet and a very special friend to me. I think we're all becoming your very good
Thank you.
friends.
Thank you.
But David Rada writes in Marjorie, you are a lighthouse of memory and poetry. I love that. You are a lighthouse of memory and poetry, as you suggested earlier. You've beautifully honored your mother and father. Would you also share your memory with us about Neruda?
Yeah, and yesterday I got bombarded with phone calls from BBC and the BBC Canada, and they wanted me to answer them right away about the Neruda controversy. And I told them I'm not going to speak about poetry without thinking about it. So they had to meet me in my own terms. So I was proud of that. But all of a sudden, thank you, David. David's a wonderful friend and an editor of two of my poetry collections. And thank you for being here. All of a sudden, Neruda is becoming they have demonized him because in his memoir, he himself wrote at age 24 that he raped a young girl. Of course, we condemn rape. It's a horrific aggression for both men, both women, but nobody can deny that he's an incredible poet. And we have to separate somehow his legacy as a poet and his flaw raping a girl at age 24. Again, a terrible mistake, but you cannot use this mistake to deny his entire corpus of work. For me, Neruda is Chile. For me, Neruda is the ocean. It's a lettuce, it's a tomato. He understands the material world. He has a love of the country, love of the people. And he made a mistake, but not that I justify him, but who doesn't make a mistake in life? And who doesn't, and it takes only a poet to write about such a mistake. Not many people would write about such a mistake. But I think now they also are using, the Communist Party is using Neruda to again punish the dictatorship because they said that Neruda was poisoned on the way to the hospital, which I believe it must be true. But I think let us read Neruda, let us be embedded in his poetry. And he didn't commit a crime against humanity. Let us learn to forgive a terrible mistake done by a 24-year-old. That's my take on Neruda now, but he is one of the greatest poets of the 20th century. And we all read him, we all love him, we're all moved by him. He's the most translated poet, and he's worth it. And we are not going to eliminate him from the great canon of Chilean literature.
We have two questions from anonymous attendees. And so the first of these questions is as follows. How religious or observant was your family or other Jews in Chile? And what are the trends regarding intermarriage and the future of Judaism in Chile and in their descendants wherever they've gone?
Thank you. Well, my father was an atheist, and I knew about it when I was 5 years old because he told me that I should act as if there was a God, even though there wasn't one, and I should become a moral person. That was his greatest legacy to me that I still follow. I am not a religious person at all. I'm a secular Jew. Like Amos Oz once said, I'm a secular Jew and I'm an atheist. I don't know if I would go far to say I'm an atheist. I do believe there's a special design to our universe, but I'm deeply rooted in all things Jewish: music, philosophy, theology, the Talmud, the Midrash, the Kabbalah. I do all the Jewish holidays, all in my house. I don't belong to a temple anymore. I decided not to belong. But I feel so immersed in Jewish thought, in Jewish ethics, but I'm not religious, I'm not dogmatic. I'm too much of a mess with these ideas to follow the orders of a religious institution. I don't believe in institutions at all, and I don't believe in religious institutions or synagogues. I'm sorry to be so open, but I think it's a gift to have been born a Jew. And I honor this gift. That's all what I could say.
So I wonder if I could just interject a question into this discussion from this anonymous attendee, and that is, when you meet another Chilean Jew, what do you talk about?
We disagree, like all Jews. We disagree about politics. I usually meet people of the extreme right, and they disagree with me, and they think I'm a communist because I am a bit to the left. I'm not a communist. We disagree. When I speak to my cousins that I love dearly, we always disagree about Palestine, the Palestinian issue. We always disagree. But it's a disagreement without rage, without revenge. It's a civil disagreement, which I feel perhaps here I couldn't have with other people. And of course, there's my classmates, my dear friends that I speak to every day on the phone, they think like me. We talk about how much we disagree about the very conservative Jews. But I think we still have a bond. My niece right now is the head of the Chilean community, Ariel Agosin. She's very liberal, very open-minded. She's not a conservative Jew at all, but it's wonderful that she's the head of this community. But I like to say that there is a bond and there is a solidarity among the 15,000 of us, even if we disagree. And ultimately, it's very good to disagree because it's never boring.
So another anonymous attendee asked the following, and I think this is a very important question. He writes, are you finding a following or interest among non-Jewish audiences in Chile and here?
Well, first I'd like to say that I'm those writers that is not much interested in the following. I don't know how to promote myself. I don't have a website. And people find me like through recommendations of Jill and Ruth and Richard found me. I do have a following in the US of non-Jewish readers. I teach a class at Wellesley College of Latin American Jewish writers. It's a fantastic class. Maybe I have 1 or 2 Jewish students, and I think that's very important that non-Jews take this class. Chile is a place that nobody's reading. The bookstores only want to feature bestsellers. I'm not interested in being a bestseller. And I don't know if a non-Jewish audience in Chile will be interested, for example, in A Cross and a Star. They wouldn't have the background. They wouldn't know the history. They wouldn't know where to begin. But I'm hoping, you can only hope, that this will change. But in the US, I'm very grateful for this, and my books are read in college classes, graduate schools, public schools. The young adult novels are in mostly all of the public schools of this country, which is a great joy to me. And the majority of the students are not Jewish.
Well, Marjorie, this has been an absolutely extraordinary experience. Getting to listen to you, listening to you answer these questions. It's just been a marvelous, marvelous experience. And I think you've given us a great deal to think about in terms of what memory is, like this idea that you advanced very early about memory as a way of paying attention. I thought that was marvelous. And so it's been absolutely wonderful to listen to you. There may be some of you who might want to review this discussion with Marjorie Agosin again, and it will be available tomorrow on our website, which is Taubman, TAUBMAN.UCSB.edu. There you'll find about 120 videos going back almost 20 years. And I'm sure you'll love to listen to this again, as I plan to do first thing tomorrow morning. So Marjorie, thank you very, very much for joining us this afternoon and really making the day for all of us. Thank you very much, Marjorie.
Thank you, Richard. I didn't have time to read about my father. It's very precious to me, but you can find it in the web, always from somewhere else, and you will see a completely different voice. And thank you all for coming. This is how we build communities, through understanding, through literature, and through respect. So thank you so much, Richard, and all of you.
Okay, thank you very much. Bye-bye.